Again, I'm going to be talking about the aquatic ecosystems. There's two types of aquatic ecosystems. There's a freshwater and there's a saltwater. There are three types of freshwater: ponds and lakes, which can be anything from the size of this classroom to Lake Superior. Streams and rivers is where runoff occurs, and then wetlands, basically where it's an area where there's not, the water is fairly shallow, and there is very, very high net primary productivity, gross primary productivity. Freshwater, defined as having very, very low salt concentration, somewhere between 50 and 100 times less salt than what's found in the ocean. Plants and animals in freshwater, if they were put in saltwater, they'd die. And so don't put them there. A pond can be anything from a few square meters. My grandpa used to have a pond behind his barn. He built the pond so that his cattle would have place to drink. But it also was cool because in the winter, it was deep enough that he would harvest the ice every winter so that he could put it in an ice house. This was back in about 1910. He would put it in an ice house, 1 meter by 1 meter cubes. He'd surround it with sawdust to keep it insulated, and that's what they used to keep food cool during the summer. They didn't have refrigeration back in 1910. And that's what they did. Ponds are seasonal. Typically, they oftentimes dry up during the summer, in particular late summer. Lakes can last hundreds, if not millions of years. Okay, Lake Superior has been there a long time. I'm from Minnesota. We have over 10,000 lakes. They have limited diversity, ponds in particular, because they're not necessarily connected to each other. Okay, they're completely isolated unless they have rivers going into them or rivers going out of them. Then there can be exchange. They're divided into three zones. The littoral zone, which is literally around the edge, which is where most of the life exists. That's where most of the plants are, therefore there's most of the life. Limnitic is basically the open water. Profundo is very, very deep. Basically, it could be without light completely in for example, Lake Tahoe, which is very, very deep. And again, this is just a picture of what I just said. The littoral is literally on the edge. Limnitic is dead center. That's where a lot of the bigger fish are going to be. Some of the biggest fish are going to be on the bottom. On the bottom is also going to be some bottom eaters like carp. The littoral zone is warmest because it's very shallow. It has huge amount of algae in it, plants, because it's shallow. In the limnitic zone, the roots cannot always reach to the bottom. And therefore, you're going to have a lot of life here because it's got a lot of the plant life. Because it has the plants, you're going to have snails, you're going to have baby fish, you're going to have crawdads, stuff like that. You're going to have tons of insects. Oh my gosh. Like I said, I'm from Minnesota originally. You have tons of insects from this area, especially the mosquitoes. They can be huge. Did you guys know that in boundary waters in northern Minnesota, it's a great place to go? There's no electricity or gas type things allowed in that area, but there's a problem. If you go camping up there, they say that you have to have extra long tent poles, tent stakes, because the mosquitoes are so big that they're afraid that they'll lift up the tent and carry you back to their cave. Minnesota is known for their big, not quite that big, but big mosquitoes. Vegetation animals living there are food for the turtles, for some of the bigger fish, and some snakes, ducks, and some other wildfowl. The limnitic zone is the open water near the surface. It has phytoplankton. It does not have plants. It has some some other organisms, some freshwater fish that depend on eating the phytoplankton. The profundo are not found in the plankton, don't have plankton in the profundo because it's deep. However, plankton don't live a long time. Anything that dies is going to go down to the profundo zone. Down there is very, very cold and very, very dense because it's cold. Very, very little light penetrates down there depending on the lake. And therefore it has lots of decomposers. Why? Have you ever had a hamburger while swimming in a swimming pool with keeping your lips open? That's how a fish eats. It eats in the water without using its hands because it doesn't have any, and it doesn't have any lips. And so there's lots of crud that basically floats to the bottom where the decomposers are there. But what's cool is what's going to happen next. During the winter, during the summer, it may be about 60, 70 degrees at the surface, comfortable swimming. At the bottom, it's 4 degrees. Why? Because 4 degrees Celsius is where the water is the most dense. So it's 4 degrees at the surface, at the bottom, 22 at the top. And autumn comes along, and it starts getting colder. And winter comes along, and it starts getting colder yet. But the problem is as it gets colder, the water on the top will start getting colder. When it gets down to 4 degrees, it goes down to the bottom, leaving 5, 6, 7 degrees at the top. And it has to get colder, go to the bottom. Gets down to 4, it goes to the bottom. Top has to cool off some more until the entire temperature of the lake is 4 degrees. At that point in time, all the dense water is at the bottom. One of the things that happens during that time is because it's flowing down, it's pushing all that thing that decomposed, it's circulating it, getting that nutrients throughout the lake. That's really great for the lake because therefore it's spreading the nutrients throughout. Once it gets down to 4 degrees at the top, it can go down to 3 degrees, 2 degrees, 1 degree, and then it will freeze. Once it freezes at the top, it's at 0, and it will go down, depending on how cold it is, to maybe 1 to 2 feet deep, which is very, very secure. You can walk out. In fact, when I was a kid, we used to drive our car out onto the lake. Parents used to put a 100-foot rope behind the car and an inner tube, and they'd drive around in circles and would be bouncing around, having a good old time on the lake. Memories. During the spring and fall, that's when the bottom layers and the top layers mix. They mix so that the nutrients distribute themselves throughout the water, and it circulates the oxygen throughout the lake. Very, very important in the winter, because sometimes in the winter, organisms don't have a lot of nutrients. They basically hibernate. For example, frogs will go down into the mud in the lakes, and they will hibernate, and their heart rate will get down to 4 or 5 beats per minute. Okay? And at that point in time, they don't have to breathe. Their frogs are such that they can get their oxygen through their skin. That's one of the benefits. That's how they evolved. Okay? Questions on that? And again, this is just basically saying that we're not going to have a lot of growth during the winter because, 1, it's cold, 2, there's not any light getting through the ice, and therefore these guys are not going to have a lot of nutrients. However, this is basically what organisms are found in ponds and lakes, the animals and plants, animals and fishes, and wide spectrum of organisms. The big ones on the bottom are going to be out in the deeper areas, waiting for seeing stuff up above. Now, why is it, if we look at these guys, if you look at those fish, what is the color on top? Dark. What is the color on the bottom? Why? Camouflage, exactly. If a fish is swimming along the bottom, one of the predators, and it looks up and it sees the white, it's going to blend in with the sky. If, however, it's swimming along the top of the lake and looks down, it's going to see the darkness, which is going to blend in with the bottom of the lake. Okay. Stream and rivers are basically how water runs off of lakes. The streams and rivers are found any place. They generally start with a lake. They can't start with groundwater. There's a headwaters, which is where it begins. The headwaters can be a lake. It can be basically runoff from snow, an ice melt. They travel all the way down to the end of the river or stream, which is called the mouth. Okay. Whatever water is in, there's something called a watershed. A watershed is an area where all the water that basically precipitates in that area is going to go down into a particular river or stream. We are in a different watershed than San Fernando Valley. Our water goes down the Arroyo, down into the LA River. If we go over to Irwindale, that's a completely different watershed. It has another dry bed river that will go down to the ocean. Rivers, streams basically start from the mouth. They go all the way down from the beginning all the way down to the mouth. It's cooler at the beginning than at the end. When it's cooler, it's also a little bit deeper. Therefore, it's going to have different fish than what they have at the mouth. There, they're going to have things like trout and things like that. All the way down at the mouth, where it's moving slower, it does not have as much oxygen, you're going to have carp, stuff like that. The diversity is going to change not only for the animals that are there, but the plants. If you've got a fast-moving stream, you're not going to have as much algae in it as what you're going to have at the very end. Towards the mouth, it's also going to become murky. It's going to have dirt in it, suspended dirt. Therefore, it's not going to have as much oxygen because it doesn't allow as much photosynthesis. There's not going to be, it's going to be not as much fun to swim in. And again, that's where you're going to have the carp and fish like that, catfish, that do not require a lot of oxygen. They're not fast swimmers. They're very, very slow swimmers. They're bottom feeders. Okay, that's why their mouth angles down. They eat the algae and stuff out of the bottom. They're like pigs. They eat dead stuff. They're decomposers like. In streams and rivers, those are all the different organisms that are found. Anywhere from fowl to dolphins to otter and stuff like that. I believe that's a river dolphin from the Amazon. And a piranha from the Amazon. Lower right-hand corner. Any questions about lakes and streams? Rivers and streams. Okay, wetlands. Wetland is basically where water is standing still. If you remember from gross primary productivity, it has some of the highest gross product productivity. Why? Because it's shallow water where nutrients have flowed into it from all the surrounding area. Because of all these nutrients, you got plants like there's no tomorrow. You're going to have pond lilies, cattails. You're going to have tons of nutrients. And again, because of that, it has very, very high species diversity. All kinds of different organisms in there because it's got all these different types of producers in there. And therefore, it's going to have tons and tons of things growing in there. There are things called saltwater marshes. How many of you have been to Cabrillo Aquarium? Any of you been to Cabrillo Aquarium? I like it better than the Aquarium of the Pacific. Did you like it? I like it better because it costs $5 as opposed to $20. Much nicer that way. But it also It has you can go right down to the beach and see tide pools. You can see a salt marsh right there. Inside, all the displays are put together by the county museum Department of Museums for the county. And so it's put together very, very nicely as opposed to the commercial ones over by the Aquarium of the Pacific. And I just like it a lot. These guys are also have peat moss. Have you ever heard of peat? P-E-A-T. That is found basically in Scotland, where all these things have, the plants have grown, they died, they fall over, and eventually that's what the Scots used to use back 150 years ago. They would cut out this peat moss, and they would take it by their houses, into their sheds, let it die, and that's what they would use for heating their houses during the winter. So there's a lot of plant life in there that can be used, could be used at that point in time for this. These are a lot of the organisms found there, everything from a leech to otters to Canadian geese. Now, what's a leech? If it grabs hold of you, it's going to suck your blood. But that is what used to be used to cure everything. And guess what? Doctors have since found, scientists have found in the last 5 years that some of the stuff that the leech puts out is very, very good, for example, for either stroke victims or heart victims, heart attack victims. It's good for them to make sure that they do not have a repeat of the stroke or the heart attack because it thins the blood very, very nicely. Any questions about fresh water? Saltwater, marine systems. It covers about 3/4 of the planet. It includes the oceans, coral reefs, and estuaries. Algae supply much of the oxygen for our planet. Even though it doesn't supply much per square meter, it still covers 70%. And what's also interesting is it has more volume for organisms than any other place on the planet. Even though each square surface meter doesn't have much, this can be 4,000 or 5,000 feet deep. And so it has a huge volume where all these organisms can live. The ocean is the largest ecosystem. It's separated into the intertidal, which is basically the same thing as the littoral zone, the pelagic, which is open ocean, the abyss, which is basically, if you tried swimming in there, you'd be crushed. That's way, way, way down at the bottom. And the benthic is basically any place that there is dirt on the bottom. That is called the benthic, the bottom area. Huge diversity of species depending on where they live. And that is where we all started. We all started originally in the ocean. It wasn't until there was enough ozone in the stratosphere that critters from the ocean went up on land. Good luck. Break a voice. Not a leg, because that would not be good for tennis. Okay, the oceans are divided into these zones here. You've got the intertidal zone, which would be comparable to the littoral zone. You've got the benthic zone, which is basically all this surface right here. You've got one zone called the bathyal. Okay, I may have spelled that wrong, bathyal. You've got the abyssal zone, and you got the euphotic zone. Euphotic zone is where there's light, the top 200 meters. Then the bathyal, which is it's still basically only water, but there's not a lot of light there. And then the abyss, where it's just insane. In the intertidal zone, that's where land meets ocean. It is very insane. Why? Because the tides come in, tides go out. Water goes up and down. You got the waves. That must, you have to be so weird to be living there. Why? Because you have to be able to handle conditions that change once every 12 hours. At some points, you're almost on the surface of the water. Other times, you may be 5 to 10 feet underneath the water. Depending on where you are, you may be freshwater during part of that time, or you may be completely saltwater time with it. And again, it also depends on what you are on. If you're a rocky coast, there's going to be completely different than if you're over sand. Rocky coast is stratified. There's different layers. And rocky coast, there are areas that are going to be completely submerged during high tide that are not covered at all during low tide. Down in there, in the intertidal zone, you've got tons of critters that, again, have to have been adapted. They have to be able to attach themselves to the rock some way or another so that they're not swept out to sea. Another type of intertidal zone is sandier. Here, the sand and mud are brought in. It's basically being brought in and out all the time. It's constantly moving. Therefore, it does not have as many types of organisms because there's not any place for them to stay comfortably because they're going to be swept out to sea. And so if we look here, okay, we can, yes, you can see the different types of organisms. There's going to be certain plants that can handle both being above the tide and below the tide. You've got stuff like kelp that are a little bit farther out. They're going to be fairly long. The kelp forest. And then you've got filter feeders like the coral reefs or other type of organisms that are filter feeders. What's interesting about the filter feeders is they are a testimony to what kind of pollution is happening. What is going on in that area? They can be harvested and help tell us what kind of nasty things are happening in that area because they filter all the water in and out as, daily. In the intertidal zone, you've got things like barnacles that are going to attach to rock. You've got mussels that are going to be able to attach to rock. You've got limpets that can attach to rock because of the tide. You've also got things like the sea star, isopods, things like that can burrow. The crab that can burrow underneath the sand. The sea star, which is one of the nasty predators in the area, which, if it finds one of the barnacles or other, it will open it up and have lunch. The wave regions, they're nasty because it's stronger than wind. It's going to be doing nasty things to them. And there's different types of wind regions. The pelagic is basically open ocean. Any place you have open ocean is called the pelagic, whether it's the top, middle, or bottom. It's generally very cold, although there can be places, for example, in the Gulf Stream, where it's very warm. So it depends on the current that's going through there. And again, they're going to have different layers that have different temperatures, where you can go from one layer down 10 feet below, and it'll drop 10 degrees. And again, in the open ocean, in the euphotic zone, it extends down to about 200 meters. It's the euphotic zone. That's where the light goes down. Now, in that area, the color of the ocean is blue-green, if you remember from physics, because the red light is absorbed, leaving only blue and green. That's why a lot of organisms fairly deep are reddish color, because that way they appear black from above, because no red light is available to bounce off. Also in this euphotic zone, you're going to have some plankton, but you're also going to have great blue whales. You're going to have zooplankton, which are eating the phytoplankton. But whales and dolphins, which are able to eat some of the other things. A lot of the things in this area are going to be streamlined because they're constantly swimming. They have no place to rest. In the bathyal or mesopelagic zone, it's going to be dark. Food is scarce. However, there are some organisms that are able to be able to go up and down based on how much air they have in their air sac to go up and down, and they go up and down twice a day. They go up during the day and back down during the night. So they migrate they go up at night to feed and back down because they don't want to be eaten by other critters. Any questions? Sometimes the critters in this area are very, very weird. They look weird and they don't get food very often. So whenever there's something alive come close to them, they will grab onto it, even if it's bigger than them. And therefore, they have to have stomachs that can extend out. Some of these fish eat things that are actually, like I said, larger than them, and it's very dark, and so they don't care how ugly they look. And yeah, dragonfish, viperfish. Anyways, the bathyal zone. Any questions on this? The bathyal zone extends from 1,000 to 4,000 meters. The only light that is there comes from the plants or animals that are down there. And there are plants or animals that give off light. The water pressure is unbelievable. It'd be like 1,300 pounds per square inch. 1,300 pounds per square inch to 5,200 pounds per square inch. That's enough to crush you. Most animals are either black or red because, like I said, the red light, there's no red light to bounce off of them, so they appear black. And again, very, very weird-looking animals, and they have big mouths. So again, if they find something, like the anglerfish in the upper right-hand corner, they grab it. Even if it's their long-lost grandma, they'll eat it. In the abyss, it's 4,000 meters down. This is where, there's not a lot of things that are down there. It's very, very unlivable. It's near freezing, and it's going to crush you. Critters that are down there are a lot of starfish, a lot of decomposers, except near the deep sea smoker, near the hydrothermal vent. Why? Because those temperatures are around 600 degrees, so it's warm enough for chemosynthesis. Up here we have photosynthesis that uses the sunlight and oxygen and CO2 to make sugar. Here they use hydrogen sulfide, the energy of hydrogen sulfide, to make their food. And there are a lot of organisms actually living around the hydrothermal vents. Like that guy. Yeah. Let's get something a little bit more exciting, like the coral reef. Coral reef basically is the tropical rainforest of the ocean. More critters living there, different types of critters living there than almost any place. The coral reef is made of coral polyps. Coral polyps is basically a mutualistic relationship between algae and the polyp, the part that produces the coral, the solid part. It's a mutualistic relationship where both of them benefit. There are different types of them, of coral reefs. Some of them are basically below water, like they're called fringes. There's called barrier reefs that are up above, right at the surface of the water, that act as water breaks, wave breakers. The largest one on the world is called the Great Barrier Reef. There's also something called an atoll, where it's basically a ring of coral around an island. Okay, it's formed on mud banks around a saltwater lagoon, and basically it protects the island. Okay. It protects it from too many waves and stuff like that. Coral reefs are not found every place on the planet. They're found where they're warm, generally. Although there are some, like those around New Zealand, in the lower right-hand corner up there, that are found fairly cold. And scientists or there's ones that are fairly hot, and they're trying to mix up to find out where corals from the New Zealand area will be able to grow around India, or vice versa, to see whether we can extend the life of the coral reefs. Coral reefs are usually found in shallow, warm water, lots of light, 70 to 85 degrees Fahrenheit. They can't survive if it's too cold or if it's too hot. Some of the plants that live there are generally microscopic phytoplankton, and they're, again, eaten by the zooplankton. Other plants that are around there are red, green, and brown algae, taking everything from kelp to the green algae that we're used to, seaweed, and sea grasses that grow all over the place, supplying nutrients and protection for animals. Fascinating facts about the Great Barrier Reef. It's over 1,257 miles long. It's off the northeast coast of Australia, and it's dying. In this place, there's 1,500, at least there was, 1,500 species of fish, 400 different types of coral, all kinds of, you can read, all types of organisms. Great white sharks come and visit. There's a type of jellyfish, which is the most, I think that jellyfish is the most poisonous critter on the planet Earth. Australia is not a fun place to go. They have lots of poisonous stuff. The coral reef is made of, it's interesting because it's got tentacles. It has basically the algae and the coral, the limestone portion, but it's also a filter feeder. And so it will get its food from the algae, but also stuff that go around it. It will suck it in. But it also supplies, even though it is a mutualistic relationship, it forms a mutualistic relationship with Nemo. Because Nemo will clean up the algae, and the sea algae, the sea anemone, the Nemo will clean up the sea anemone, and the sea anemone will not poison the clownfish, because sea anemones have poison on their tips that will poison other fish. A lot of the tropical fish are anything from angelfish, butterfly fish, seahorses, and octopus and stuff like that. Now, some of the interesting things about seahorses I don't like. The females lay the eggs, and the seahorse male is the only male on the planet Earth that gives birth. The rest of the males, the rest of us could probably not handle it. If we tried to put up with what women go through, guys, I'm serious about this. If we try to put up with what ladies put up with once a month or during childbirth, we would be crying so much it's not funny. So in the coral reef, a sample food chain is there, going from zooplankton to coral to starfish to octopus to moray eels. Some of the things that are damaging coral reefs are global warming, ocean pollution, the fact that sometimes fishermen are stupid and their nets get too close to the coral reefs and destroy them. Other dangers are sometimes people go out to the coral reefs and pick up pieces, or they're walking on them and break them. All of those things are detrimental. Almost last thing, estuaries. Estuaries is where the the rivers and streams come down to the ocean. Those are very interesting. A lot of FRQs have been on these, where what's nasty about them is part of the day during high tide, it's salty. During low tide, it's fresh water. However, it has tons and tons of nutrients that come down from upstream. So it's got tons of the cattails. It's got lots of plants. It's basically one of the nurseries of the ocean, because a lot of the baby fish are born right there. Okay, lagoons are another type of thing found in the ocean. Basically, they're saltwater surrounded by land, just a place where fish can go and grow up. Another thing that you can see down by Cabrillo is something called a salt marsh, where it's tons and tons of plant growth in an area, but it's due to the tides. You've got salt water coming in and out of that area. And the last thing I'm going to be talking about is something called mangroves. Mangroves are a type of tree. What's fascinating about mangroves is that the trunk of their tree is above the water. And when their roots come down, it's like your fingers hanging down. And those things go just barely down into the ground. Do they need to collect a lot of water? No. But if one of those the branches of the mangrove or one of those roots break off, they will float around for for a long time, and when they hit land again, they will grow another mangrove tree. Any part of the tree breaks off, it floats to another island or someplace else, and it will grow another mangrove. Are there any questions about any of this?